afternoon, Miss Winston. Thank you for coming today to talk to me about Julian and discuss the results of his speech and language evaluation. We're just going to take a few minutes today to discuss everything that I found during the evaluation. Is now a good time to do this? Perfect. So I understand that Julian was referred by Dr. Who, his pediatrician, but that it was at your request. Is that right? Okay. You have some concerns about his speech.
Yeah, he seems to make some sounds he shouldn't be or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail today. So, just wanted to clarify that information. I also understand that his preschool teacher reports that he's been struggling with grammar and being understood by others at school. Mm-hmm. Okay. It appears he's becoming a little bit self-conscious about his speech as well. So that's something that we'll get into a little bit more later. I want to let you know Julian was cheerful during the evaluation, and although you could see I had to encourage him a little to come back to the therapy room, once we entered he was perfectly fine and had no problem interacting with me, so that was really good. The first thing I did was examine the structure and the function of Julian's oral mechanism, which is, I was looking at his teeth, his lips, his hard and soft palate, his tongue, and how all these things come together and work together in order to allow him to produce speech. Everything was adequate during my examination, so I have no concerns there. I will mention that I had to use a tongue depressor to assist him with lifting his tongue and sweeping it back, which is not a concern at this point. I just wanted to let you know in case he mentioned Miss Kristen stuck some funny stick in my mouth during the evaluation. Now we're going to talk about each area of communication, so it'll be a little bit easier to understand. We're going to break it down. Please feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we get through the information. First, we are going to discuss articulation. This is simply just how we make speech sounds. I spoke with Julian for about 10 minutes in the therapy room about some dinosaur books that we had in there. He was really enjoying those, so I was able to get a nice sample of his speech during that time. I did notice that he consistently produces a p for f, so he might say pan for fan, and then I also noticed he says b for v, so you maybe have heard him say berry for very. You have noticed these errors in his speech?
Yeah, they sound pretty familiar.
Okay, good. So he does this in all positions, meaning that if the sound occurs in the beginning of the word, in the end of the word, or in the middle of the word, he tends to do those errors no matter where that sound is. So another area that I noticed, another sound error that I noticed was a W for L. So you've likely heard him say ladybug instead of ladybug, or maybe ball for ball. I wanted to point out that I heard this as well as W for R, so he says wabbit instead of rabbit. I'm making mention of them today, but these are what we consider to be developmentally appropriate errors, so these sounds are still developing for him, and that's okay. That's totally normal. They're not sounds that we expect him to have fully acquired at this age, and likely there's other children his age making the same errors. So this is a normal process, and I'm not concerned about them at this time. So I just wanted to make you aware that when you're hearing them, that those are okay, and we're not gonna focus on those. If they do continue in the future, we can always reevaluate and possibly address them at that time. So the next area of Julian's communication we're going to talk about is his voice. All of Julian's vocal parameters, such as the pitch, his loudness, his rate of speech, those were all appropriate for his age and his gender. So we really have no concerns there about voice. Pragmatics is another area that I wanted to discuss with you. This is just the way we use language. It's our language for social purposes. I recall that you mentioned during our first conversation that Julian gets along well with his brother and his peers. He has no problems at school interacting, and his teacher reported the same information. So that's really good. Children at this age are usually pretty social and interactive. So if he wasn't that way, we might have a concern.
He needs a little nudging sometimes, but
yes,
he usually participates.
Exactly. He's definitely a little shy, and that's okay. He didn't initiate a lot of conversation with me. But he played with all the toys appropriately. The testing items I had, he interacted with, used objects for their actual use and not just pretend. So everything there was age appropriate, and we had very positive interaction. We briefly mentioned he's becoming a little self-conscious about his speech, right? So like you said, he's shy and he needs a little encouragement sometimes. I believe that this kind of regression of him starting to be more self-conscious at school and around his peers is related to his speech sound errors.
Oh, really? I didn't know if it was just him getting older or...
And that could be it too, but I feel like he's noticing that he maybe doesn't sound like the other children, and it's making him, a little self-conscious. So I think if he were sounding more like the other children, he'd be a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident with his speech. So we're going to work on that too. The next area is fluency. This is just kind of described as our accuracy and our flow of speech. At this time, I don't feel that he has anything that we need to really focus on. All his fluency was deemed appropriate during the evaluation. It is an area that I would say that we should monitor as he develops. There were a few disfluencies that I noticed during the evaluation. He tended to get stuck on the initial word when he would start a sentence. So one time he told me, the dinosaurs lived 1 million years ago. Is that something that you've ever noticed in his speech?
He'll do that sometimes, yeah. When he gets excited or if he gets real nervous sometimes he'll do that. But what we'll do is when he starts to do that, tell him he needs to slow down, think about what he's going to say, don't say anything until he says it right? That's what we should do.
I would suggest probably that you handle that a little bit differently. Like I said, right now it's minor, but I would give him a chance to finish his statement, let him process what he's trying to say, be patient, and just kind of let him get that out. Because if you stop him, it could maybe potentially cause more stress on him and maybe make it a little bit worse. So right now I would just say kind of sit back, allow him to process, and let him get his thoughts out. So that's good. It's minor. Like I said, we're really not going to worry about it right now, but it is something that I'll continue to monitor, and I hope that you will too. And just let me know if you notice that it's happening during any particular activities or any certain times or anything like that, or if it seems to be increasing. Okay? The last area we're going to discuss is language. This is a very broad area. It covers the form and the content of language, so word order, sentence structure, how we combine words to make sentences, also things like vocabulary and grammar. So I administered the preschool language scale, which we call the PLS-5. This is a formal language evaluation measure for children. It looks at auditory comprehension, which is what a child understands, and also expressive communication, so what a child says. Julian's auditory comprehension results were appropriate. So he understands what he hears and he responds and engages appropriately. The expressive communication is our area that we're going to talk about today. That was just slightly below average. So, for example, for his age, his utterances or what he says are slightly shorter than typical, and they tend to be incomplete. So he speaks in 2 to 3 word utterances, and that's okay sometimes, but at his age we want to see that increasing to more 4 to 5 word utterances, and those sentences should start to get longer.
How would you increase his length of sentence?
Well, that's something that we would definitely work on in therapy, and it's also something that you can easily facilitate at home. You're just going to kind of expand what he says. So if he says something like, get cup, you can add more words to that. So say, do you want me to get your cup? Do you want juice in your cup? Just give him more of those filler words, articles like a, and, the, descriptors, more adjectives and adverbs and things like that in his language. Okay. He also has a tendency to leave off verb endings, particularly the ing. So I pointed to a picture of a girl, and he told me the girl is sleep instead of sleeping. So do you notice this
that was
sometimes
probably
at home?
The biggest I've noticed.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one. Another area that I saw a few errors when using plurals. So I pointed to a picture and asked, "What are these?" And he said cat instead of cats. He is using, using appropriate possessives and pronouns was kind of another area where he had a few errors. He said things like him and she instead of his and hers. But I just want to mention that to you because you've probably heard it. But right now, that is also a skill that's still developing. So it's common for a child his age to
When he says
to
like
make.
him went and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
I would suggest that you could say, "Oh yeah, he went," when he says those kinds of things, but it's still pretty normal at this point. His errors tend to be in what we like to call morphology and syntax, and those are just fancy words for word endings, plurals, possessives, and like word order and sentence structure, like I was mentioning earlier. He didn't tend to use many articles in the evaluation, such as a, and the when talking, so that falls under that same area as well. He does use prepositions appropriately and knows what they mean, like in, on, under. He also answers questions logically and appropriately when asked, and his errors are typically in that form and structure of language. So that's the basis of his speech and language evaluation. We have discussed his oral structure and function. We have no concerns there. Articulation, how we produce speech sounds, and we mentioned those errors that he's having there, like the P for V and the F sound. Vocal quality we discussed. We have no concerns with his voice. His social language is normal. Fluency, I mentioned I would like you to monitor that and let me know, if there's any specific times or if it tends to be worsening. Okay. And then finally, we discussed his language. If you have any questions about all that, I know it's a lot of information, it can be a little overwhelming, but I promise as we move forward, we'll keep you informed and make sure you fully understand everything as we go. But did you have any specific questions?
I don't think I have any yet, no. Am I able to contact you if I...
Absolutely. Please, you can contact me at the office anytime, and I can answer any questions that you have, and you'll probably think of more when you get home, and that's pretty common, so please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm going to kind of move into a little bit of the recommendations that I have for Julian. I would think that I would like to see him in therapy once per week for 30-minute sessions. We do have openings in our clinic at this time, and I would be available to be his therapist if that's a route that you would like to take. At about 5 years old, children should be anywhere from 90 to 100% intelligible, which means they should be understood 90 to 100% of the time. And that would be our long-term goal for him if Julian began therapy, is we want him to be more intelligible. We want him to be better understood by his peers and his teachers. It's often very common for people in the home to understand everything he says, but maybe strangers don't understand him as well.
Yeah, I interpret a lot from even when we go to family get-togethers and stuff.
Yeah, and that tends to happen when you have children that have these speech sound errors. So we want everyone to be able to understand him. If he began therapy, that would be our long-term goal. We'd begin by working on that F and V sound and increasing his ability to produce those two sounds correctly, so the F and the V. As far as language, I want to work on increasing Julian's utterance length, so having him produce more than 2 to 3 words at a time, and work with him on using plurals and possessives, using that present progressive ing at the end of verbs like we were discussing earlier. And like we mentioned, that's something that you can also focus on at home to help as well, just adding more words to his utterances and giving him more descriptors in his speech. So, also, you can help with the speech sound errors at home as well as those expanding those utterances. The F and V, just provide him a model when you hear him misarticulate a sound for what it should sound like. So if you hear him say, turn on the pan, you could say, okay, I'll turn on the fan. Did you hear me say fan? Can you say fan? Okay. Simple things like that. Just provide him that model for those errors. Exactly. So we'll start with very basic things for you to incorporate at home. It will become easier for you as we progress, and also easier for Julian as he becomes more familiar with what we're doing in therapy and realizing that that's carrying over to home, and just kind of saturate him with that information. That will help make a big difference. I really think that Julian will succeed in therapy and make great progress. He's very intelligent, has a great personality, interacts with me well, so I think that that comfort level will be good and help facilitate his development as well. Did you have any more specific questions for me at this time?
No, you said he was comfortable with you. That was one of my concerns, especially with him becoming, more shy and everything.
Right.
But if you feel that that's because of the speech sounds, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Right, exactly. And I think we see that pretty often in children. They notice. They're very smart, and they're very keen to their environment, what's going on around them. And they know when they aren't quite doing something like their peers. So I definitely think that improving those errors and decreasing their occurrences will help him be more confident.
Okay.
Well, thank you again for coming. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to working with you and Julian. I do have a couple handouts for you. This one just kind of goes over the therapy language, evaluation terminology, and things like that. So as you go home and you think about what we talked about today, you can refer to this if you had any immediate questions, and this can kind of help explain it a little bit more. And also I have one here that talks about the difference between speech and language. And so that's some good information that you can read over and kind of see how those two areas are separate and then how they're interrelated.
That's great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.